A child prodigy with an affinity for the dark side of the Force, Darth Zanna was the apprentice of Darth Bane. The fabled Sithari of legend, Bane was the visionary figure who destroyed Lord Khan's Brotherhood of Darkness and restructured the Sith Order under the Rule of Two. By operating in secrecy, the Sith were now free to slowly and subtly undermine the integrity of the Galactic Republic, and patiently work toward the downfall of their ancient enemies, the Jedi Knights. By limiting their numbers to 2, the Sith would exploit rather than suffer from the inevitable infighting that had plagued their order so often throughout their earlier history. The new system ensured that an apprentice could only stake a claim to the mantle of Dark Lord if they proved strong or cunning enough to challenge and defeat their master on their own, the idea being that the Sith would grow stronger with each successive apprentice. A powerful Sith sorceress, Darth Zanna eventually lived up to Darth Bane's expectations when she defeated her former master after a grueling duel on Umbria, a world steeped in the dark side of the Force. Immediately thereafter, she took on an apprentice of her own, an Iktachi assassin named Darth Cognis, whom Bane had selected for Sith training. Together, the two set about carrying out the Sithari's imperative. They turned all of their efforts toward bringing about the destruction of the Jedi and the covert ascendancy of the Sith Order by perpetuating the all-important Rule of Two. Oppo Rancisis was an eminent Jedi Master who operated during the final 2 centuries before the Battle of Yavin. A former Padawan of the Jedi Master Yaddle, Rancisis was the scion of the ruling family of Thespius, the homeworld of his species. His mother, the reigning blood monarch of Thespius, gave her son to the Jedi Order in the hopes that upon completing his training, he would return home to claim his birthright and rule his people by taking advantage of the wisdom and power he had gained during his time with the Jedi. Predictably, Oppo turned away from the life he could have led as a royal, but returned to his homeworld to end a violent coup that had resulted in the death of his sister. Over the years that followed, Oppo Rancisis went on to serve as an instructor at the Jedi Temple, where he trained a great number of students for well over a century. A brilliant tactician, his strategic insight and strict devotion to the Jedi Code made him known to the Jedi High Council very early on, but his exceptional performance as a commander during the Stark Hyperspace War is what led to him becoming a staple there, for it was at this point that he earned a lifetime seat upon the body. He would go on to serve as a leading member of the Council of Reconciliation, which focused on peaceful negotiations to end conflicts when dealing with issues outside the Jedi Order, but could also be called upon to determine the fates of Jedi accused of misconduct. As a general of the Clone Wars, Master Rancisis met his end on the planet Selu-Kamai, where he had been coordinating a Republic attack on a separatist stronghold located on the bleak world. It was there that the fallen Jedi Sora Bulk had been overseeing the creation of a cloned army of Morjakai warriors. After months of laying siege to the planet, Oppo's continuous use of the Force was beginning to take a toll on him, and he was growing exhausted. Seeing his chance to level the playing field, Bulk engineered the old Jedi's demise by sending a force of Unzadi assassins as a distraction before closing in to deliver the killing blow himself. Although Oppo's companions would go on to win the day, it wouldn't be long before Darth Sidious revealed himself to the Jedi, and began the chain of events that would culminate with the execution of Order 66 and the institution of the Galactic Empire. So my original plan was to use Oppo Rancisis in a matchup against Ki-Adi-Mundi, as they are 2 council masters I had never used before, and I've always wanted the opportunity to share my analyses of their respective skill sets. However, the more I thought about it, the more a matchup between Oppo Rancisis and Darth Zanna appealed to me. I thought it would make for a more exotic and frankly a more interesting matchup. To add to that, I also think that both characters have been pretty well overrated or underrated depending on who you're talking to. I saw this as the opportunity to explain my view of both characters. So, without further ado, let us proceed with Darth Zanna versus Oppo Rancisis, the Sorceress and the Serpent. If these two noted figures from galactic history ever met on the battlefield, who would triumph in a fight to the death? Darth Zanna was a human female who remained solidly within the prime of her life, being aged in her early to mid-30s by the time of Dynasty of Evil. Attributed with high levels of adaptability and resiliency, humans still lacked many of the more exotic and extreme environmental adaptations developed by so many of the alien species who inhabited the galaxy. After years of Sith training, Zanna was described as having the body of a gymnast, being lean, lithe, and strong. Where she excelled was with her speed and agility, which she honed to a level that allowed her to dart around and avoid opponents of superior physical ability, or else to dodge and manipulate her adversaries during situations where she found herself outnumbered. For visual reference, I would consider the general levels of speed and agility displayed by Asajj Ventress indicative of what I would envision for Zanna. This is based on her performance in battle, as well as her force-enhanced escape from the self-destruct-enabled stone prison on Done. As far as her tolerance for pain is concerned, she has weathered an elbow to the jaw from an enraged Darth Bane, sustained force-enhanced kicks to the face, and continued to fight after suffering broken ribs, though it must be admitted that her level of performance deteriorated somewhat under such conditions, and she has even struggled to maintain consciousness on at least one occasion after being struck by her master. Darth Zanna appears at first glance to be so mundane with respect to her physical abilities because of the fact that it's easy and almost natural for one to contrast her physique with that of her masters. Bane's pain threshold, endurance, stamina, and strength are all well beyond the general standard of even most master-level force sensitives. Zanna simply isn't built that way, and she pales in comparison to her master in that particular regard. However, this, in and of itself, shouldn't be taken as too much of a slight against her. She was still able to keep pace with him and defend against the hulking behemoth that was Darth Bane. It's worth noting, though, that by her own admission, she didn't really have much of a speed advantage over him, despite his muscular bulk. All in all, while she was a tough and capable figure, with solid physical attributes under her belt, Darth Zanna nevertheless suffered from her fair share of shortcomings. Oppo Rancisis was a male Thespiacian, a species easily distinguished by their scale-covered serpentine lower bodies, humanoid upper bodies which featured two sets of five-fingered hands that terminated in elongated claws, and of course the long flowing hair that sprang from their heads and faces, obscuring their facial features. Thespiacians, like snakes, possessed jaws which unhinged to open wide enough to consume their prey, which they generally preferred to eat while still alive. After extensive exposure to members of other species, most Thespiacians have grown to recognize this particular practice to be unnerving to members of other species. As such, they will usually consent to eating cooked food, though they are known to consider such foods to be lacking in zesty flavor. The first things we shall consider where this remarkable alien is concerned are their four arms. At first glance, this would seem to be a massive advantage, as Thespiacians would appear to be natural-born General Grievuses. However, it is to be noted that the lower set of vestigial arms lacked the strength of the upper set for the vast majority of Thespiacians. In a cultural sense, Thespiacians of high social standing considered it unseemly and unsophisticated to show their second set of arms. However, we are concerned primarily with the relative lack of strength compared to the other arms. Notably, generations of working-class Thespiacians did not display the usual weakness due to the physical labor they and their ancestors had to perform. As a member of the royal family, Rancisis would have likely belonged to a Thespiacian subset afflicted by degradation to their second pair of arms, his Jedi training notwithstanding. He may have relied on his additional arms in order to more easily direct his force energies when locked in combat against multiple adversaries. However, I'm disinclined to think he would make heavy use of them for other purposes, given their relative weakness. This is made up for in large part by his tail, however. Their powerfully built and tremendously strong lower bodies enable Thespiacians to move with shocking speed, overpower their adversaries with well-placed blows, or even catch them in a constrictive full body bind. However, by my estimation at least, this was offset somewhat by the fact that their physiology made them large targets. Despite his uncanny ability to dart around the battlefield, even Master Rancisis proved incapable of avoiding all damage. However, in the one notable example we have, he was very badly outnumbered, and performed well all things considered, even by his opponent's admission. Thus far, Oppo's attributes have been based purely on the natural makeup of his species. When it comes to what we can say about him based on his own merits, there is one important consideration to make, that being his old age. Oppo Rancisis, at the time of his death, was 187 years old. Thespiacians were considered venerable after reaching the age of 90. 90. That's it. Off the top of my head, I think this may be the most extreme case of a Clone Wars era Jedi living so very long after passing the average life expectancy of his species. Even Anya Kiro doesn't quite compare in this regard, and that is saying something. As amazing as it is that Rancisis is still breathing as of the time of the Clone Wars, more amazing still that he's actually viable in a fight. Fatigue would undoubtedly be a major obstacle for him to contend with in any sort of engagement that lasted for a prolonged period of time, and this is a factor that must be seriously considered. In my view, Darth Zanna's levels of agility, strength, and durability are all either outstripped by or roughly on par with Oppo Rancisis' own attributes. Her ability to channel the Force to enhance her speed, however, is in all likelihood greater than his own, considering that she was able to keep pace with her master Darth Bane, as well as a battle meditation amped Jedi weapons master on Tython. However, this is offset somewhat by the fact that she is not the aggressor. It bodes well for her ability to contend with Oppo should the Jedi take the offensive initiative, as she would be able to respond to his speed, but that's about as far as the advantage will go into her corner. To add to that, we have Oppo's alien physiology to consider. His uncanny ability to twist and contort his body leaves him in the best position to bring the fight to her in unique and unexpected ways, and her speed advantage will likely be pushed to a high degree in order to keep up with what he's bringing to the table. Having said all of that, his extreme old age lead me to believe that of the two of them, Zanna possesses greater stamina, and given the kind of pressures she's had to put up with for prolonged periods of time, I would say that she has the stamina advantage by quite a wide margin, due to both her intensive training as well as her comparative youth. Fatigue is going to be the Jedi Master's greatest hurdle to overcome. Oppo's only real hope is to end the fight quickly before fatigue begins to factor into this. All in all, Oppo Rancisis gets the physical edge. However, this advantage would only apply during an early fight scenario. From the very beginning of her association with the Order of the Sith Lords, it was clear that Darth Zanna possessed both a frightening command of the Force, as well as a seemingly instinctive affinity for the dark side specifically. This rare combination left her primed for the study of Sith sorcery, which her master encouraged her to pursue with gusto, despite the fact that his ability to guide her down that road was limited. Sith sorcerers were born, not made. While she was trained primarily as a Sith sorceress, she possessed the more traditional powers as well. Her Force-enhanced physical attributes were nothing short of masterful, though the same could be said of every member of the Rule of Two, and most Jedi Council members as well for that matter. Her use of telekinesis was potentially devastating, as she has blasted targets with enough force to reduce them to a bloodied pulp, and even blasted apart her own cousin's hand, leaving him with a bloody stump in place of an arm. However, she has never made a conscious use of such overtly destructive telekinesis in battle, at least when she's locked in combat against other trained Force wielders of near equal skill. Neither has she ever settled a fight with an opposing Force user purely on the basis of her telekinesis, and those capable of erecting Force shields for defense have little difficulty turning aside such attacks from her, though to her credit, she possessed the same familiarity and depth of skill with raising telekinetic barriers for defense, as well as to prevent herself from being telekinetically disarmed. Ironically for a Sith sorceress, Darth Zanna lacked the ability to generate or manipulate Sith lightning, and her only defense against it was to deflect the torrents of deadly energy with her lightsaber. Fortunately for her, this is a non-issue as far as this matchup is concerned. Her go-to offensive Force abilities were her terrifying spells of madness, Sith techniques which enabled her to induce madness by invading her target's psyche and torturing them with horrific visions until they were either driven wholly insane, or simply in order to soften them up for a killing blow once the opportune moment presented itself. However, while the effects have proven absolutely devastating against certain individuals, we have never seen her reduce a Jedi Master to pieces in such a manner before. This isn't to say that she couldn't, but it is true that the secret to dispelling the visions of madness was willpower. A being strong enough in the Force, and capable of recognizing the illusions for what they were, could potentially counteract the effects so long as they had already come to terms with their own inner demons, as Darth Bane successfully did during their final showdown on Umbria. While I do consider the power to be potentially devastating, I definitely think this is an ability that has been drastically overrated by some fans. She was of course also skilled with the more commonplace mind tricks as she proved during her mission to Sereno, and her ability with battle precognition enabled her to anticipate her opponent's attack sequences, which obviously bolstered her defensive capabilities. Zanna's skills with concealment and stealth were also highly advanced. Remnants of her concealment spell at the healer Caleb's hut on Umbria endured and held a presence in the Force for a decade after she'd cast it. Perhaps her greatest achievement in this field was when she successfully infiltrated the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, blinding the Jedi she encountered with a spell that projected a false light side aura, enabling her to masquerade as a Padawan with access to the temple archives. Darth Zanna's most destructive power was the trump card she used to defeat her master during their final duel on Umbria. Calling upon the dark energies trapped and buried within the planet's surface like those of Lake Nath, Zanna conjured tendrils of pure, dark side energy, taking the form of a flesh and bone disintegrating mist. The use of this power required her to gather her energies, which took some time, and was highly labor-intensive, requiring all of her focus, and leaving her prone to attack when in use. It remains unclear whether she is capable of calling upon this power on her own, or if she requires a potent source of external dark side energy to accomplish this. It is my personal belief that the latter is true, as she was noted in the text of the novel to be drawing on power that had been buried within the planet's surface for centuries. In addition, she only used the power once, and did not use the power when she fought her master earlier on more neutral ground, quite a different arena than the nexus of dark side energy that was Umbria. Oppo Rancisis was a noted battlefield commander, and was, with the possible exception of Master Yoda himself, the single greatest tactician operating within the Jedi Order during the Clone Wars. Given his value as a tactician, as well as his extreme old age, it comes as little surprise that he functioned less as a frontlines commander, as he did his best work from a distance by coordinating strategies from a command deck, or else by delving into the hearts and minds of his comrades and enemies alike, by channeling the Force. Oppo's use of Force enhancement was respectable, though slightly stunted due to his incredibly advanced age. He's to be commended for what he was able to accomplish, but he'll hit his upper limit far more quickly than most. As Evan Nova has noted in his own videos concerning the character, his aptitude with telekinesis was advanced, and he made extremely heavy use of these powers. During his fight with the Anzati, he employed several Force blasts to defeat his opponents, as well as telekinetically guided his lightsaber throws for death blows or disarming strikes. I'm in two minds about this. On the one hand, the fact that he employed these abilities so heavily leads me to believe that he was forced to pull all of his tricks out of the bag, as his physical technique was likely insufficient to overcome the force he was up against. And I think it goes without saying that such a heavy use of the Force also led him to drain himself far more quickly, as he did this after an exhaustive session of battle meditation. On the other hand, the fact that he was still able to employ these abilities while in such a state, and did so without hesitation, means that he will not pull any punches. He is willing to throw everything he has at you if need be. Like a wounded animal, in some ways this makes him all the more dangerous. Oppo Rancisis is credited as a telepathic savant in his role-playing guide entries. Needless to say, abilities such as the Jedi mind trick would have been like child's play to him. He has engaged in long-distance mental communication while working in concert with fellow masters. And although Evan Nova's suggestion that such a feat would be well within his own capabilities while operating on his lonesome is the product of mere speculation, I am inclined to agree. Additionally, he was one of the greatest masters of battle meditation produced by the Jedi Order during his era. Using battle meditation, a Jedi could bolster the performance of their troops by increasing their morale, while simultaneously demoralizing the enemy. They could also facilitate communication and synchronization among their allies, allowing them an uncanny ability to anticipate, predict, and respond to their enemies with focus and clarity. It was also possible for them to see the events of the battle through the eyes of their many troops, and even to envision the many possible outcomes of a battle in attempting to will the one they preferred into existence. This is why Oppo Rancisis was so valuable to the Republic war effort, despite the fact he rarely drew his lightsaber on the fields of battle. According to the Power of the Jedi sourcebook, Rancisis also possessed skill with the art of battle mind, essentially a downgraded version of battle meditation, wherein the practitioner internalizes the effects, boosting their own focus and morale. All of that being said, I do feel that Oppo's abilities with battle meditation were overblown by Evan Nova in the video Oppo Rancisis vs. Kit Fisto, wherein he claimed that Oppo's attempt to see into the very heart of the entirety of the Clone Wars implied that the Jedi Master was tentatively influencing the results of hundreds of battles and millions of individuals all throughout the galaxy at the same time. In truth, all Rancisis really claimed to have done was to run into a brick wall when he failed to penetrate the shroud of the dark side, which obscured his ability to determine the hidden purpose behind the war. That being the result of Palpatine's influence, of course. I bring this up not as a slight against Evan, but rather because I simply feel his view on this matter is inaccurate and paints too formidable a picture of Oppo's abilities, prodigious though they undoubtedly are. Same thing goes with Evan's assessment of Oppo Rancisis' signature ability, the power known as Malaysia. Malaysia was a power of which Rancisis had been a long-term instructor during his time at the Jedi Temple. The power allowed a Jedi to manipulate the equilibrium and bodily functions common to most organic life forms. This ability could be used to induce extreme dizziness and nausea, and victims of the power reported the effects to be akin to the feeling of having been struck on the head with a hammer. In essence, the ability caused one to feel as though they were suffering from an extreme hangover, debilitating them without causing any serious permanent damage. Sounds pretty cool, right? But the thing is, I don't really think Malaysia has as much relevance in the context of a fight between master-level Force wielders. The idea of a Jedi or a Sith being so woefully ill-prepared to defend against a technique like this is far-fetched in my frank opinion. And that's coming from someone who really likes the idea of the power. I'm all for more light side abilities that can take an opponent out of play without doing lasting damage. I think it's a really clever idea. I just think it has next to no value against Force wielders trained via the control branch of Force study to maintain rigorous control over their body by channeling the Force. My friend Callan, or Reedy4 as many of you may know him, has described Oppo Rancisis as more of a supporting class of Jedi, and this is a basic though accurate description that I entirely agree with. He had a broad scope of powers and employs them quite freely. He strikes a nice balance between the practical and the ethereal. He is capable of using his abilities to off-balance his opponents on large or small scales. His telekinesis is respectable and well integrated into his overall technique. He's got a load of abilities that make him absolutely devastating against the likes of common foot soldiers, mercs, or assassins. But against fellow Force wielders of the master level, his abilities wouldn't do much more than allow him to provide various forms of counters and cancellations. He's not going to be dominating the fight with almighty displays of Force power, and neither would he be capable of neutralizing the sorts of elemental powers favored by Sith Lords like Darth Bane or Darth Malgus. However, his consummate skill as a telepath leaves him better primed to weather the mental assaults Darth Zanna often relies on to achieve victory. I don't think there's anything he could do to throw her off her game, as Malaysia isn't a power I think would be all that applicable here, and unfortunately, battle meditation isn't something he's going to be able to perform while locked in combat. I think it's likely that Oppo would stand a good chance of neutralizing Zanna's most often used powers, but at the same time her abilities with telekinesis, even on her worst day, would rival his own, and on her best, they'd very clearly outstrip his. While I do consider the chance for Zanna to summon her dark side tendrils to be too much of a fluke possibility to be counted on, if she could, those would be something of a gambit on her part. She'd run the risk of leaving herself exposed against a slithering serpent who may well stand a chance of outmaneuvering the tendrils, as even Darth Bane nearly managed to do just that with his own basic human physiology. That said, Oppo's large frame also makes him a larger target, which could work against him, though as I said, I consider the possibility of the tendrils coming into play very slight indeed. More because of her telekinesis, as well as her more unrestricted use of the Force for physical augmentation, I am inclined to award Darth Zanna the edge as a Force wielder between the two, though this alone does not stack the odds in her favor. Darth Zanna was a master of Surisu, the third form of lightsaber combat. Almost purely defensive in nature, Surisu was originally developed by the Jedi as a response to the increase in availability of blaster technology throughout the galaxy, though it later became an expression of purely defensive, non-violent action. While an unusual form for a Sith to study almost exclusively, given its philosophical roots in defense rather than offense, the decision was made out of practicality in Zanna's case, as her master knew her light physique and slight build would leave her ill-suited to the strength-oriented martial arts. The form was characterized by tight, efficient movements in order to provide maximum defensive coverage and to conserve energy. Supreme masters of the art have long been considered to be unbeatable, though Zanna has been disarmed by her master, though not without great effort on his part. Zanna's own weapon was designed specifically to bolster her defensive style. She wielded a saber staff with slightly shorter blades than were commonplace. The weapon's design allowed her to create an impenetrable wall of defense. Her master instructed her to control her weapon by flicking her wrists, rather than the whole of her arm, grounding her weapon close to her body and keeping the blades cycling in a constant twirling motion. In this manner, she was able to meet oncoming attacks by outmaneuvering her opponents, rather than by meeting them in a head-on clash. Her application of Surisu meant that she operated by deflecting, redirecting, and shunting aside opposing lightsaber blades, waiting for her opponents to tire out. The ideal theory for Zanna was never for her to dominate the combat, but rather for her to control the proceedings of the engagement. She did put all of her eggs into one basket, which made her style something of a calculated risk, as she couldn't really hope to directly overpower her opponents, which I do see as a shortcoming. However, that gambit usually paid off, as her style gave her parity with opponents who were physically mightier than her, as well as more skilled with the lightsaber in general. When faced with opponents at around or beneath her own level, Zanna's skill with Surisu proved truly devastating, as she would be capable of stonewalling their offense before transitioning to an offensive sequence of her own in order to end the fight swiftly and decisively on her own terms. Against fellow master duelists, attributed with a similar strength in the Force to her own, however, all she could really do was buy herself time and hope that they would either tire themselves out or wait for an opening where she could exploit her Force abilities to come into play. Now, this isn't to say that she was 100% successful at doing this, of course. If she wasn't careful, she would run into problems very quickly. Against the likes of Sorceress and Darth Bane, she frequently found herself on the losing end of things. All she could really do was bat aside their assaults, hoping to bide herself enough time to retaliate using her Force powers. In addition to this, her less than perfect footwork and inattentiveness to the surrounding environment she's fighting in has gotten her boxed into tight corners as well, or even tripped her up, leaving her scrambling with her back on the ground. Her tactical outlook has also left a bit to be desired as well, as she has failed to accurately read her opponents in the moment, such as when Bane had baited her into attacking him by fooling her into thinking he was extremely vulnerable while unarmed. She willfully, and later by her own admission, foolishly, attempted a stance she was by no means familiar with, and it cost her what might have been an easy victory. Finally, while it is true that Zanna killed the most Jedi during the infamous duel on Tython, this was highly circumstantial due to the fact that she had the aid of her master, as well as the incompetence of one Johun Othon working to her benefit, which allowed her to seize the advantage when and where it mattered. I often find people tend to overestimate Zanna's abilities based on her body count on Tython, even though it was clear to me that if she'd been forced to fight Sorceress alone from the outset, she would have lost. Now, having said that, of course, I must give her credit for the fact that she was not amped by battle meditation, whereas he was. Still, the point remains. Zanna's shortcomings are as apparent to me as are her many accomplishments, and as impressive as her abilities with the blade are, all she really has on her side is a shield and patience, as I've said many times before. As Kreia herself said of Surisu, when used exclusively anyway, all one is going to be able to do is delay the inevitable. Equipped with a standard lightsaber which featured a green blade, Oppo Rancisis' preferred martial arts disciplines have never been established in any source. However, I am of the firm opinion that his most likely specializations can be reasonably inferred. In the aforementioned video, Oppo Rancisis vs. Kit Fisto, Evan Nova theorized that Oppo Rancisis was a practitioner of the 1st, 4th, and 6th forms of lightsaber combat, Shicho, Ataru, and Naman. Admittedly, I helped him reach this conclusion during a discussion we had over Skype some years ago. In light of a more recent Rico Chico Maliko video concerning the character, I have since changed my mind somewhat, though not drastically. The only thing I've really backtracked on is the extent to which I think Oppo's knowledge of Ataru would factor into things. As Rico correctly stated in his own video, Kukruk vs. Oppo Rancisis, the Jedi Master's serpentine physique would leave him ill-suited to a full and unrestricted practice of the martial art, at the very least without seriously retooling it, as the form is so heavily reliant on acrobatic evasions and force-assisted leaps. However, as Evan correctly stated in his own video, Oppo was a Padawan of Master Yaddle, who appeared to favor the acrobatic style, and it was also known that Yoda himself, the reigning master of Ataru, had a hand in Oppo's training. Oppo likely had a great deal of experience practicing against wielders of the form, even if he didn't integrate it quite so fully into his own technique. With regard to his probable skill with Shicho and Naman, while this is just speculation, it makes the greatest amount of sense to me. Shicho was specifically noted to be well suited for Jedi of any body type or study, including those with a serpentine physique. As well, Oppo has demonstrated great skill at taking on multiple opponents, another benefit of the most basic of the Jedi arts. Naman served as the traditional choice for Jedi consulars, a well-rounded and balanced fighting style possessed of no major strengths or weaknesses. The style was specifically designed to accommodate Jedi who put less emphasis on their martial arts training, leaving them free to divert their attentions to alternative studies. Form 6 also stressed the integration of force abilities into one's technique, which was again something Oppo proved to be adept at, having seamlessly worked in telekinetic strikes and saber throws during his fight with the strike team of Anzadi assassins. Relying on his skill in these areas, he was able to defeat all of the Anzadi, even though they had him badly outnumbered, trapped within a confined location, and caught relatively off his guard, though his telepathic abilities admittedly allowed him to recover from this setback nearly instantaneously. What is more, he managed to defeat each and every one of his attackers, despite the fact he had been exhausted by the months of continuous use of battle meditation. It was only after this point that he was killed by Sora Bulk, who opted for a stealth assassination over a head-to-head engagement. And sadly, here is where I'm going to have to rain on Oppo's parade a little bit. A lot of people, my friend Evan Nova included, have painted what I consider to be a slightly inflated portrait of Oppo's overall skill level here by making note of Sora Bulk's supposed fear of facing the Jedi Master in battle. Here's the thing. The source material itself makes no mention of Bulk being intimidated by Oppo Rancisis in any way. Bulk admits from the outset that, as a tactician, Rancisis is without equal, due in large part to his prodigious use of battle meditation. It is in response to this, and only this comment, that Dooku then instructs Sora Bulk to create a diversionary battle to encourage Rancisis to enter into battle meditation, for it is then that he will be in a state where he is most vulnerable. Going a step further, it's worth noting that Rancisis was one of the greatest telepaths among the Jedi of his era, and a short distance away he had a Jedi strike team comprised of Quinlan Vos, Xian Giselle, Kukruk, Ashrad Het, and so on. If Sora Bulk had attacked him outright, the Jedi could have easily formed a mental link to his compatriots and summoned them to his aid, which would have left even an esteemed swordsman of Bulk's caliber royally screwed. What Sora Bulk did here was, for once, the smart thing. He ended the fight before it really began, by fooling the Jedi into entering an engagement he knew he could handle on his own before stabbing him in the back. And while I think Oppo could have given him a run for his money in an actual straight-up fight, personally, I have no doubt that Bulk would have prevailed in such an engagement if he had a more forgiving timetable to work with, as well as a guarantee that the Jedi wouldn't be able to call for backup. All in all, Oppo Rancisis was still an extremely skilled and well-rounded fighter in his own right, who compensated pretty well for the fact that he wasn't a dedicated lightsaber duelist by any means. But he has a definite upper limit, and I would strongly caution against taking Bulk's refusal to meet him in a head-to-head engagement on that singular occasion for more than it's worth, given the circumstances leading up to his assassination. Ironically enough, and despite the exotic repertoires of force abilities sported by both characters, I just don't see as much of a disparity between these two where that category is concerned. Therefore, I consider the contest of their skills as opposing martial artists to be the most relevant determining factor in this analysis. So here we go. Oppo Rancisis represented an excellent blend of the Jedi Guardian and Jedi Consular classes. He was definitely more focused on his study of the Force than his skill with the lightsaber, but he was by no means a pushover when it came to single combat, and his powers, personal interests, and insights were all oriented toward analyzing, manipulating, and coordinating battles in order to end them as quickly and with as little bloodshed as possible. Everything from his skill with battle meditation to his development of a non-violent power like Malaysia point to this conclusion. He was, in essence, a Jedi consular who dedicated himself to understanding and controlling battles, be they small or large in scale. As awesome as I think this aspect of his character truly is, he was most certainly not a dedicated lightsaber duelist, and he was very rarely deployed directly into the fields of battle. As a result, I honestly consider him somewhat inexperienced relative to Darth Zanna when it came to personal combat, and while we have seen him bust out some seriously impressive feats considering his advanced age and exhaustion at the time, Darth Zanna has routinely weathered more severe storms than I think he's capable of unleashing. The fact of the matter is that while I don't consider her a supremely skilled lightsaber duelist, I could say the same thing about Oppo. And while he's more likely to take the offensive initiative than she is, and would have a far more unorthodox approach than someone like Darth Bane, Zanna has still been through, and survived worse, than what I think the Jedi could ever hope to bring to the table. She has been forged in the fire since day one, practicing and training and honing herself into a weapon meant to strike out against Darth Bane, which is pretty serious business no matter how you look at it. She would need to adapt to Oppo's extreme physical abilities. He would have the initial advantage, but that's really about it. And I'm not saying that she would have a cakewalk there. I think she'd encounter some serious difficulties adapting to what he's bringing to the table, but that doesn't mean I think she'd fail. This is one of those times where I think being arguably over-specialized in one area accounts for more than being more generally well-rounded. Zanna undoubtedly falls short in certain situations, and Oppo, by my estimation at least, does seem to possess a higher level of general competency. But her defense has been developed to such a high level that I absolutely believe she could handle anything he could throw at her. To add to that, her form is almost perfectly suited to dealing with Oppo specifically, not because his own skills with martial arts are truly lacking, but rather because his extreme old age and the resulting fatigue from a prolonged engagement would cause him to play right into her hands. A situation like this is exactly what Zanna's skills as a martial artist were developed for. And when I realized this, I suppose that's ultimately the reason I decided to do this matchup in the first place. Too often, Zanna is ascribed with godlike abilities with respect to her force powers by her fanbase. But too often, her skills as a lightsaber duelist are casually brushed aside by her detractors, which I would take partial blame for not explaining myself entirely clearly in the past. I regret that my own prior analyses of the character may have been slightly flawed or misworded, and I do think that, especially if some of my viewers haven't read the source material for themselves, this can have a harmful effect. I think she's got an unjustly bad rap as a martial artist, and that's what attracted me to this project. I felt that this was the perfect way to highlight that while she is a powerful figure with respect to the Force, and her abilities in that regard are generally what she does have to rely on, this is only a necessity when she's facing the absolute best of the best. And while I respect the hell out of Oppo Rancisis and feel that he would be able to negate the vast majority of Zanna's powers, such as her Sith spells of madness, given his own astounding telepathic discipline, I wanted to highlight the fact that I really don't believe she would need those abilities to win this fight. She is a serious badass with respect to defense, and if she plays her cards right, she would undoubtedly be able to take down Oppo Rancisis thanks to her consummate skills with Surisu. So for once, not on the merit of her legendary skills as a sorceress, but rather on the basis of her physical stamina and her excellent foundation as a defensive lightsaber duelist, factors which often go underappreciated in my estimation, I declare Darth Zanna the victor. So you all know the deal by now. This is all just my opinion and interpretation of the evidence. More important than that, it's all done in the name of good fun, so please don't get bent out of shape if you disagree with my verdict. As always, I encourage civil discussion in the comment section provided below. I've got plenty more in store for you guys over the coming months. Thanks for watching and have a nice day. And may the Force be with you. Always. Bye guys. See you soon.